Thank you for joining us today. I am your moderator, Scott Grizzle. We are going to be talking about building streaming workflows for higher education. I am, again, like I mentioned, I am Scott Grizzle, Senior Solutions Engineer for Watson Media and Weather. Been doing streaming and video for roughly about 20 years. Started off working in education and then been doing a lot of associations and things like that. To my left, I have Colin Sandy. Go by.
Hi, I'm Colin Sandy, CEO of excuse me, Sandy Audiovisual in Laurel, Maryland, a suburb of Washington, D.C. We've been streaming for 22 years now, and we're also a system integrator.
Eric Nicely from University of Notre Dame. I'm the lead streaming engineer. We take care of all the streaming needs for the campus and out to multiple destinations, whatever is needed throughout the university.
Hi everyone, I'm Chris Martin. I am the IT and Multimedia Manager at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, where we do tons of live streaming across campus. I've been there for about 8 years now.
That's great. So as we prepped and we planned, as I mentioned before, I've been doing this a while, so I've seen a lot of different use cases in video. I've seen it in entertainment, online education, graduation, sporting events. What are some of the most common workflows you are seeing being used today, tomorrow, so on? Chris, do you want to start off?
Sure. As you say, we're obviously streaming commencement, we're streaming sports events, but it's been amazing just over the past 8 years that I've been at the university, just how many events are now getting streamed, how many things are requesting streaming services for the events. Some of the major use cases we have, in addition to some of those obvious use cases, are things like office hours for faculty and their classes, office hours for our online courses that are pre-recorded and available for students. It's kind of a way to give students an opportunity to actually see a live event and ask questions in real time. And that's kind of our biggest use case at this point, I would say.
Okay, well, Colin?
Sure. For me, we just did a commencement actually on Sunday, so that's kind of the typical streaming use case, but also distance learning.
Okay.
It's a big deal, especially when there's a visiting professor or some expert or subject matter expert. We also do a lot of K-12 work, and those children are homeschooled. So when there's a particular instructor that they want to see or learn from, streaming is a really important part of their curriculum.
Very cool. And Eric?
Pretty much very similar use cases. We also sometimes will handle large press conferences, or last week we also did Notre Dame Day, which was 30 hours of live streaming with custom content, over 200 stories with, we handle a lot more academic as well as the faith and athletic, and then the large campus events. We do probably right around about 240 live streams a year.
Wow.
Off of campus.
What we talked before, you made a lot of sporting events, you do a lot of commencement, you do a lot of remote speakers. I know, and Chris, you mentioned before previously, you have on-the-road webcasting. You do a lot of stuff off campus. So what are some of the tricks you guys do with some of that? What are the elements you do?
Right, so in addition to doing about 150 events on campus, like everything from live speakers that include, I specifically work in the writing area. So we have poets and authors and screenwriters and playwrights and musicians and critics and scholars who are on campus. And we have a special live event space where we house all those. But yes, we also do a lot of on-the-road webcasting as well, and that's mostly in conjunction with events that are taking place away from campus that need a live stream. We also have an online course that's open to the world, so we have students across the world who are taking the course. So taking a live stream out to a different part of the world is a great way to engage with those students and to also create content that feels real and alive to students who are tuning in from across the world.
Is that the Central Penn Video Network, or is that something different?
Central Penn Video Network is just a group in the school, not one that I'm involved in. But yeah, basically our setup at the University of Pennsylvania, at least, is very decentralized. So we have some central things, some IT services that are centralized, including a Penn Video Network who handles some live streaming use cases, but largely it's every school and college kind of for themselves within the university for streaming use cases.
All right. Eric, you mentioned you do a lot of masses. You do Catholic TV, and you also mentioned 30 straight hours with production with 3 sets. So you have a lot of stuff going on.
Yes, there's, because we work across the campus, that we're not focused on just one particular group. We're able to, whether it's Sunday morning with a mass, with all the cameras are set up with POVs so that they're in discrete places in the basilica, or it's, a large production with, 150, 200 people between the storytellers to cameramen to production facilities. Our infrastructure is so intense. We're now using Evert's IP router, and with the infrastructure that we have right now, with multiple control rooms, we're able to actually have events for where we don't even need a broadcast truck come in to be able to handle it. And so that production is then handed off to our team for the delivery.
Cool. And Colin, you mentioned a lot of homeschooling and distance education. What are some of the workflows you're seeing, or different use cases are involved with those?
Sure. Now, because we don't have a single client, we serve various educational institutions. We kind of have a workflow template. Okay. And it kind of goes back to our early days of streaming, where we literally had to put out, seriously, a snail mail, a mailing to see what do people have. Do they have a V90 modem? Do they have a 486? Do they have what have you? So we still do that today. Not in that same sense, but it's kind of a cycle of a workflow, where we kind of start with knowing our audience, right? And it ends with a workflow by getting analytics. So we know that, for instance, when we started 22 years ago, almost everything was desktop, of course, dial-up. Today, well, I'll give you 3 days ago, my metrics from 3 days ago, 90% mobile, 10% desktop and other devices, whether it be Roku, what have you, right? And we keep plugging that into how do we change the graphics that are overlaid, how do we change the requirements, so it's a constant cycle in that workflow.
Very cool. Oh, so we're actually talking about workflows now. So we'll start off with Eric in a second here. What are some of the workflows you've implemented in your presentation? Let me change slides real fast.
So as we talked, previously, I was mentioning the 30 hours of live streaming for Notre Dame Day, particularly for that event. It's in the aspect of can't fail. There's hardware is going to fail, software is going to fail, CDNs are going to fail. There's going to be times that there's outages. And it's important for certain events that have to be able to get the content out there. We actually, little technical difficulty with the slides. It's all right. We design it in up to a tertiary level of failure. And so we have the primary streams, backup streams, coming off of separate hardwares. We're actually streaming to 3 different CDNs. And so we look for complete redundancy. So if a piece of hardware fails, the backup hardware automatically takes over. If the CDN failed, the web developer already had pages that within at most a couple minutes, we would be able to fail over to a different, next slide.
Next one, all right.
We would be able to immediately change over the embed code to go to a different service. It is separate CDN, so it's not seamless if it's a CDN failure. But if you notice the top 2 encoders, it's very busy because it's a very complicated event. The top 2 layers are going to the 3 CDNs, and encoder 3 then is pushed out for social media. with the primary social media feed to Facebook, Periscope, and then the fourth and fifth encoders during peak times were actually used for pushing out the custom content on encoder 4 to particular Facebook pages and some of the local broadcast networks who also wanted the social feed, and through cross-posting on Facebook. And then the fifth encoder was used to be able to take part of the content during this event. There is a 2-hour concert with different performers coming up, and we actually streamed the entire 2 hours off to another social media feed. Well, the primary broadcast was only cutting in and out of that. So at one point, we were actually running a total of 5 simultaneous encoders to be able to manage all of the different content deliveries. If you want to jump over to the next slide, we also sometimes will, on campus, need to take a backhaul of video from a non-fibered location. And so we'll use Makito encoders to be able to send the stream back into our infrastructure, then through everts, and we can redirect it back into our elemental encoders, or use it during commencement. We'll use that feed to actually redistribute to overflow locations. So if for bad weather, or if people just don't want to be in the weather at all, then they can go to alternate locations to be able to pick up the feed off of an IP multicast. If you want to jump to the next slide, just pushing through a couple different kinds of workflows here. This is another workflow where it's location, and we're all self-contained in one space. 2 camera using an ATEM to switch, using Wirecast off of a laptop to be able to do the live streaming, so software encoder, and being able to do the graphics off of Wirecast, the camera switching off of another location. In this event, this was actually a group of us actually flew to Rome because the people that were doing the content, the actual talent that needed to be doing the interview, was wrapped around a conference that was happening in Rome last year. And so the team of us, the videographers, live streaming, and interviewer, moderators, we all traveled there and did this out of space in a satellite location that the university has just a block off of the Coliseum.
Very cool. So Chris, let's jump into your workflow. I have your slides up here. Let me change it.
Sure. So, we do, like I said, all sorts of streaming. Like Eric, we do graduation and things on campus. Most of what I'm involved in is more on the day-to-day, smaller event side of things. So these are, as I was mentioning earlier, visiting authors or poets or screenwriters, musicians who are on campus for a live event. And we have people in the room who are there to watch, but we're also making the stream available for everyone who wants to tune in worldwide. So our workflows are a little more on the kind of day-to-day level, lower level, kind of something that we have implemented also so that students can run, work-study students and can kind of gain some skills in the process, hopefully. So this is the Kelly Writer's house here. This is the exterior. We just completed a large renovation here. This front room is now an extension of our live event space, which is the Arts Cafe. Next slide is the interior of that space. So we just redid this whole space, and we've been streaming at the Writer's House for many, many years, and back when audio-only streams were a thing, so way before my 8 years of being at the Writer's House. And so we kind of cobbled together pieces over the years to do the live streaming. So I just wanted a quick show on the next slide that what are some of the things that we do stream, our daily live events. ModPo is a poetry MOOC that's on Coursera, a massive open online course. It's been very popular. We've had more than 150,000 students enroll over the past 7 years. And that's a use case we have for live streaming to kind of bring an otherwise pre-recorded online course to life with a live stream, a way for students to actually engage with the instructor and with his teaching assistants. We also have a Wexler recording studio, the Wexler recording studio, and that's where we generate a lot of audio content such as podcasts, and we also do on the road, as I mentioned. So next slide shows kind of our original workflow that we had cobbled together in our Arts Cafe space pre-renovation. I just wanted to show you this to give you a sense of where we were, what we had cobbled together before we had a chance to completely overhaul it into our new setup. So originally we had a few Sony RNX 100 cameras that we would set up manually kind of as we needed them, maybe one, maybe two, maybe three. And we had Blackmagic HyperDeck Studios to kind of ingest that signal into the, Blackmagic Intensity Extreme Thunderbolt HDMI capture cards. I want to be precise. That we were using to ingest into a Mac Pro because Mac Pro is Thunderbolt, and that was kind of our option at the time when we were doing this, this original setup. And we were using Wirecast to kind of encode our stream to YouTube, Facebook, or to disk, depending. Usually at least two of those things we were doing. We were also using a Wowza Media server on campus for many, many years that we still use for certain use cases, and I just don't have that pictured. So a pretty straightforward setup, but it took a lot of work, a lot of running cables, and so we just completed an overhaul of this space, which is on the next slide. It kind of shows how we've streamlined our setup and made it a little easier, but also better end product as a result of this setup. We now have 3 Panasonic HE40SW PTZ cameras that are all controllable by an RP50 device, and all of this is now kind of controllable all from our main control desk at the back of the room, which is really nice rather than having 3 separate camera operators or something like that. For some redundancy's sake, we have all 3 of the PTZ cameras going through a Blackmagic HyperDeck Studio. Okay. That is a hard disk recorder that can kind of record each signal of video just in case anything goes wrong later in the chain. It gives us a little redundancy. We also are bringing in more and more people via Skype and Google Hangouts to be a part of the actual live stream when we're doing interviews or just having additional guests on that way. So sometimes we're doing that. The kind of quarterback of the whole system is the Blackmagic A10 Production Studio 4K, which allows us to kind of switch between our camera shots, and it takes our audio from our Mackie mixing board. We also decided to get the control surface because, well, it's kind of nice sometimes to just have those physical buttons, and you could do camera switching through the through the rack unit there, but we kind of wanted to have the control surface. It's also nice. It's a little easier, I find, for students who are maybe new to this technology to kind of see that physical control surface and see the changes as they press physical buttons. All of that gets mixed and it goes through another HyperDeck Studio, so we have a recorded version of the kind of mixed program feed. We decided to separate out from our previous setup our recording and our encoding. So the Mac Pro was previously doing both jobs. We kind of separated that out so that the Mac Pro isn't pushed quite as hard. Not that it can't handle it, but it's a little nicer to kind of offload those things, especially as encoding standards get higher and more pressing on computing power. So it gives us a little more flexibility and leeway there. And we're still using Wirecast. That's been rock solid for us for many years, and we're happy with it. And these days we're going to YouTube or Facebook Live, generally, if not our own Wowza server, which we're still using for some use cases. We also, as I mentioned earlier, have a road kit. We've taken this everywhere from London to the West Coast, USA, to Canada, and it works really well because for the most part, the cameras are a little bulky. These are the same cameras from our original setup, the Sony cams, but those are a little bulky, but otherwise we can fit this Roland Mixer V1 HD mixer, video mixer that I spotted here at a conference one year and fell in love with it. Very simple mixer, allows you to easily switch between 4 inputs. Loved it. It's very simple, fits in a backpack, and then we use the Matrox Monarch HDX to encode and save our feed to disk.
So we do have a quick question for you, is how many disks do you go through? Look at this diagram. You're recording every ISO feed, and you also have the mix feed.
Yeah.
These are not tape anymore.
Right. Luckily, we got out of the tape days, though we still have some lying around. But yeah, it's a lot of storage, and that's actually one of the challenges that we're having is where to store all of this recorded data in a effective and cost-effective way.
Okay. All right. There we go. And Colin, what is the workflows that you designed? I know we don't have your slides. Unfortunately, you got late for us getting here.
Well, kind of take a different approach since we have multiple customers and kind of multiple scenarios and multiple budgets, high and low. But so again, we kind of break it down into a template. We always look at it the same way, that every webcast, entails acquisition, right, of the content and transmission of that content. Gets to some CDN, so distribution of that content, then of course receiving it and using a player. So looking at it at every stage. And acquisition, both Chris and Eric talked about, having a switcher, right?
Yeah.
We like all-in-one devices like the live stream studios, like the NewTek TriCaster, vMix rigs, et cetera. But with all-in-one production devices, you have one point of failure.
Yeah.
Right? So with any all-in-one device, we always have a backup. So if there's a TriCaster, there's an ATEM or a Roland or something more solid state paired with it. If there's Wirecast, there's also something more solid state paired with it. Of course, single cameras are never good because, again, one point of failure. Like here, we have a 3-camera shoot. You can always go down to 1 camera if it's a PTZ, what have you. One of the key bottlenecks is transmission that a lot of folks, especially schools, if you have a limited budget, don't really focus on. And they look at, well, you have your wired internet connection on campus and that's it. But you do have options, and they range in affordability, of course. Everything from your cell phone, which is actually a great alternative in a pinch, right? Has a radio, access to a data network. For more higher end things, depending on who's speaking, you might even bring in a satellite truck, C or Q band, what have you, to get a internet connection, bonded cellular. And of course, I'd never recommend it as plan A, but a lot of the production systems can do both Wi-Fi and wired. So to always have like a Wi-Fi access point or the campus network as a backup. Yeah. And then with CDNs, we already talked about both having multiple CDNs and then CDNs that use multiple backbones for transmission of their packets. Now the acquisition or the receiving side, of course, has natural redundancy sometimes, depending on who your audience is, right? If it's more of a point-to-point kind of campus-to-campus scenario, you're looking at someone who might be on a single connection and they're in an auditorium or at a remote campus, what have you. That can be a problem. You want to think of redundancy on that end as well, and a lot of people don't. But most of the time, people are on their phones. They might be on Verizon or AT&T or what have you. So they're on different networks with different devices, and you have kind of redundancy.
Well, like you mentioned using a cell phone. We actually mentioned before, one of our senior executives no longer with the company was doing a lot of town halls, and he was flying the crew, flying around with his executive. We made a passing statement. Why don't you, you have a full crew out here, it's burdensome. Why don't you just get a good tablet, a tripod, and do your town halls that way? He tried it once, loved it, never went back. For him, it was the easiest way because he just wanted to communicate with his staff. Teachers communicate with their students. There's just ways out there. The easier you can make it, the more chance you're going to use it more often. Cell phone's a great way to go. And what I love to hear, because I'm a former broadcast guy, redundancies. All of you mentioned redundancies. Like you mentioned the TriCasters. We have a TriCaster. It's very common to have a Sony or Panasonic switcher or something out there. Just in case something happens, you also have a separate encoder. having nice one, everything in the box is great. If that one box dies, you got to have redundancies, and obviously with the ISPs. So that leads me to the next thing, pitfalls and successes. So we actually just, on our prep, like some funny things came up. So let's jump into some of pitfalls and successes. Do you want to go first, or should we enter your throat?
No, sure, go ahead.
All right. So Colin, what are some of the pitfalls and successes that you've seen, and how can we tell people here not to run into stupid things?
What not to do,
Yeah.
right? I think the key thing, especially these days, is to make sure that your stakeholders are all on the same page. You have your IT staff, and they're very much concerned with network integrity and security. You have your development staff and your marketing staff that are very much looking at how many eyeballs they can really put on your stream, and how broadly you can distribute your message. And they really have to find a happy medium. And just even little things like, should you put up a registration wall in front of your page to capture prospective students or what have you? If you have like a MBA program or something, you want to get those people and email them afterwards. Is that a good or bad thing? If it doesn't work well or kind of impacts the viewing experience, it could be a very, very bad thing. One thing that I've found that doesn't work well is, again, back to not knowing your audience. A simple example, putting out a 4K stream, right, and not having any kind of scalability so that someone on their cell phone could actually watch it. Networks are very good today, but
not everybody can handle a 4K stream. Yeah, that's a very, very big problem. It's like we have customers in the past came up to us. I need to do 4K. I need to do 8K. Why? Oh, because my boss has bought a new 8K TV and he wants to go that route. That's great. It's also your boss also has past cable, and doesn't mean it can work across the net. What is your audience? And that's the whole thing is, who is your audience? What device do they want? Workflow, and make sure you have a way to reach everybody.
Yeah, not last thing till you go on. Really simple thing. If your people are on mobile and you have lower thirds or titles, are they formatted for someone watching on a 55-inch television or for someone on a 7-inch screen? Right.
Well, the term used to be TV safe.
Right.
Is it still title safe, TV safe?
Well, not only that, I mean, you could read most titles on a 55-inch screen. If you use the same font size or comparative font size, it's going to be, a 9-point script on a phone. So those sort of things have to be taken into consideration too.
Very good. Eric.
So going back to one of the themes in the first section that we all talked about is kind of scalability of being able to hit different environments. So something that we all have is different environments that we stream out of and different locations. So particularly for us, we have the one camera, one laptop, 2 people workflow, and it's for us, we need to sometimes be able to go into a classroom where a professor is doing a presentation, because that's where the class is scheduled for that semester, and so we don't have control over moving that very easily. And that scalability then, if you have a 2-camera, 3-camera shoot, but still in location, you need to be able to have that scalability to be able to, have the switcher, have, local encoding. And then for our larger events, most of those happen out of a location that is, has full infrastructure where the camera spots are all fibered and everything's coming back into a control room. It's a full production crew. It's going through Dreamcatcher for video replay, being able to do capture of every camera through Dreamcatcher to be able to record ISO of every camera, be able to cut it, and be able to save the ISOs as well as full production program feed. So it's really about understanding where you're going to work as well, which talked a lot about, and what is the infrastructure there to be able to work off of. Particularly for us that have university IT departments, we're able to work very closely with them. And that's one of the pitfalls when we've gone to other locations. We try to not go into an unknown location without doing site scouts and do network tests, be able to find out what the bandwidth is, even within our own university, because it might be a building that we've never streamed out of before, and we find out that there's something with the switch in that space. Our networking is really good with working with us that, I pick up a phone and I'm able to talk directly to them. If you go into a place where you don't know who the networking is, that's a lot more of a scary environment that I'm happy I'm not in. Because you're welcome. Been there once, didn't like it very much because
That's my life.
Because that's a big pitfall. Network, everything is network dependent, right?
Yeah.
So it's unless
And
you're
especially
cellular bonded.
And you also have historical buildings, so you have weird infrastructure built into it.
Right.
Yeah.
So for us, we know. I know that I did 5 events out of that network jack, and I'll still go and test it and say, okay, yes, that's exactly what I expect to see with 100 meg up and 100 meg down. That's not what you're going to find in a lot of the locations because our networking is much more robust. So for us, it's just that scalability and adaptability to our physical locations is probably our biggest challenge, and because we have multiple kits to be able to also be successful at that.
Nice.
I forget who said it on our call. I think it was you, Colin, have
Probably.
the network guy on speed dial.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. One of our biggest issues is, or that I see, is a non-technical issue, and that's just the process of making sure you actually have a live audience watching your stream. Is anybody? You're producing this beautiful product, and is anybody watching the thing? So that takes a lot of work on the part of whoever you're working with, whoever's asking you to do the stream. So while it's not a technical issue, I think it falls in our court in a lot of ways during the consultation process and the early planning stages. Are you planning to send out emails? Are you considering like Facebook cross-posting? We at the Kelly Writers House still send out physical calendars through the mail to people. Can you believe that? So we spend a lot of time. Spend a lot of staff time, making sure there's promotion of these events so that people are actually watching. And also managing social media, I think, gets kind of put into the afterthought category sometimes as well. As somebody from the team who wants to live stream this, is there somebody there who can manage the live comments that are coming in on Facebook if you're using Facebook or YouTube? Is somebody there responding to those people who are actually watching? And that helps, not only with like the Facebook algorithm seeing that you're actually responding to textual comments, but it also helps, just with the general overall viewership experience. So a couple issues that we've run into that I don't have answers for yet are copyright issues, for sure. As an educational institute streaming a presentation that might have copyrighted material, it might be fair use, it might not, but YouTube takes it very seriously and will, quickly terminate your account if you do it a couple times. And so that's something we're battling with. Running our own Wowza media server, we never had to really think about that as much, and just also the replay of these items with copyright material.
With music in the background, everything else. You have politicians playing music. Do you have rights to it?
Right. We're a live event space, so we have music on before and after the programs just for ambiance, and YouTube doesn't like ambiance.
Yeah. Now, one thing you guys mentioned, a couple you mentioned, conflicts among stakeholders. So since we're online here, what is the issue you guys run into with online videos and audiences?
I guess I'll jump in.
What?
No, I think we on the call talked about the Harvard study.
Yes.
And it's really more of an administrative conflict and a mindset conflict of folks that are putting on an event saying, we want to make sure that there are butts in seats, and we don't want the online audience to essentially cannibalize our in-person audience. And for whatever reasons, I mean, we do clients across the board. So it could just be, for the look of it, could be a marketing thing, it could be a monetary thing that they're actually, seeking money from people that are in the seats and not online or what have. There's various reasons across the board. And, studies have shown that that really isn't the case, especially for perennial events. But it's hard to get over that mindset that we really have competing interests. Really, they're complementary interests, the online audience and the in-person audience. They have been for some time, but it's just hard to really convince the stakeholders that it's really not a fight.
And so, there is a Harvard study, and also there is a Forbes article about this. There's misconception, well, if I have a concert, no one's going to come if I do it online. Well, there's experiences you don't get. It's a great online video is a great driving force to help fill up an auditorium. Hey, these are great people. I love those. I want to go to the next one. And also, if you're in an event, you're taking notes, I can guarantee within a day you will forget what we said here. So now you go back online. Oh, hey, he commented a great topic here. What did he say? Now you can look it up. So definitely, they go hand in hand.
There's a big part for us that we talk about being qualitative, not quantitative, and it's because we're in some cases more concerned with the 8 researchers in 7 different countries that need to be able to absorb that content, because it's such a specialty stream and specialty conversation that it's not about numbers either for us. But at the same time, we have a huge issue with our large events where they don't want to publicize the live stream because they're scared that we won't fill the brick and mortar. And the reality is it's a global reach that you're doing the live stream for, not the local community most of the time. We used to be able to have more aggregate numbers with the service that we used, Ustream, who was able to give us state-by-state heat maps and give us an understanding more clearly where that viewership was coming from, as opposed to, it's not mostly local, it's Texas, it's New York, it's Rome, it's London, depending on what the conversations were, and being able to see where those are. It wasn't the local audience that wasn't coming in, it was the global market who was able to be viewing it. And that's one of those traditional mindsets that's hard to break people out of.
Yeah. We're running out of time, so I do have one more question that let me jump in real fast. The use cases we mentioned, where do you see these use cases in the next 5 years?
Well, I'll definitely say that lifelong learning is kind of the hot topic in I guess, in general. But definitely higher education's thinking a lot about, how, people need to continue learning with the evolution of the way the economy works and the way jobs, new technologies come on the market. So I definitely think that there's going to be a demand from us in education to provide more public access to just education in general through live streaming, and it's going to continue to be an important way to acquire new students as a marketing medium as well.
Sure. I think kind of going away from the broadcast model where it's one-to-many and more, I wouldn't say peer-to-peer, but more interactivity. So students will be able to interact with the same quality, right, and with the same kind of characteristics as the instructor in the main broadcast. So more development in technologies like WebRTC and the like, so they can have real-time communications that look great, that are somewhat open source and affordable.
Eric?
So yeah, echo the online learning is a big portion of right now, as opposed to just a push stream. We're making a little bit more of a shift for ramping up more video conferencing and video webinars to be able to have that higher level of interactivity. This summer, we're running a handful of online classes where the professors are actually coming into a studio facility where we're using a product to be able to have a larger amount of larger screens, larger interactivity, and have those classroom settings where the professor is able to see a little bit closer to the face of the student. So, you know, everybody that's taught or spoke, you have a better connectivity to your audience if you're able to see them. If you're only in a closed room with light sitting there and you're not able to interact with the facial expressions and whether the students are sleeping or awake, then you're not able to have the same kind of you know, dynamic interaction. And so that's one of the things that we're doing this summer is with a larger online, with large screens and array of the students so that the professor can be looking at them.
I'm so glad you brought up interactivity real quick, just because that's something of great passion to me, and trying to scale interactivity as well is something we spent a lot of time with at the Writers' House, allowing students from across the world who are watching a webcast to participate at different levels that they're comfortable with. So we've tried everything from, you know, low stakes, you know, quick poll when you're logging into the webcast to taking phone calls on the air, you know, social media, things like that, voicemail lines where we'll play back a voicemail if you have a question on the air like radio does. I think that's really important to think about as well. I'm glad you brought it up.
That's great. Any questions? We have a little bit of time for questions. Do you have any? Yes.
So you guys speak about all this infrastructure that goes behind setting up all these broadcasts and whatnot. Is there any security, extreme and anti-piracy involved in any of this, or is it free to the world and we don't care what you do?
So
I guess it's a question
let's repeat the question. So the question was, is on these infrastructure, but on the streams, is there any security? Is it free to everybody, or do you need to have a watermark? Do you need encrypted DRM, things like that?
We've dealt with in both categories. Most of what we do is free to everybody when we're live streaming. But we also have things like town halls where we want somebody, you know, a particular group in London or Rome to be able to view it that is not public. And we also have situations where we have departments that are scattered across the U.S. For development that is a private conversation as well. Still a live stream, still a one-to-many push, but in those cases, yes, we try to make sure that there is security in the stream. We put the embeds typically hide behind a authentication page, and so there's various ways to do that and varying levels of security. I mean, there's military-grade encryption, and then we're much below that. Because it's not that critical, it's more of a privacy thing, not a security thing. But we also deal with, in some cases, some contracts where you need to be able to secure that, where you're having 5, 10 people in the conversation and need to have that conference call that is completely encrypted end to end. And most of the time we're flipping to a point-to-point communication for that, not a one-to-many.
Sure. Well, to answer that too, you can also do geofencing if you want. You know, we use IBM Watson Media primarily, other platform, and it allows for, you know, restricting access in various locations geographically. You could also do, I believe there's Streaming Manager for enterprise product, allows you to use your already existing security infrastructure so single sign-on to access the content, so only those people who are already in your access control system can view it. And there's various other schemes. We talked a bit about using the Elemental encoder, and it has the management capabilities to tie into various forms of digital rights management and other types of management things. So the high-end encoders do that too on the encoding side. And you may have seen the announcement with even Facebook has gone to an encrypted stream using RTMPS. So yeah, there's a lot of solutions out there, and I think the streaming community is definitely becoming more security conscious.
Speaking of that, is anybody here ready for the new Facebook migration?
I'm doing one at 2 o'clock.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Curious, thanks for coming. You talked a lot about your live streaming workflow. I don't know if we have time to mention, like, to go into your on-demand workflow too. How do you make those titles available to your audience after the fact?
Good question.
Very good question.
Oh, so the question is, we've been talking about live workflows. How about VOD? how are you able to make video searchable and attainable by audience for the VODs, video on demand?
We're working on figuring that out right now. We've been running a Wowza media server that was set up by some IT guys who haven't worked at Penn in 5 years or something like that, and we're trying to think about next steps there. So it was a very manual upload to the Wowza streaming server, link it manually in a database that we had created, and we're thinking about next steps. Panopto has been pretty popular on campus as a tool for uploading materials, and it gets automatically captioned, which a lot of people like, and which is something we're trying to figure out more of how to do. So that's kind of where we're at right now, but we're thinking about what's next for on demand for sure. We have a ton of material.
So we also use Panopto for hooked into our LMS. We're just getting away from Kaltura, which was also for privatized VOD asset delivery. And we're migrating everything into Panopto because it takes care of our LMS. It takes care of a lot more of what we as a university are looking for. But then also for the VOD, it's pretty common that a lot of the different schools and the university as a whole use YouTube and Vimeo as public facing delivery, because a lot of our content, we're putting it out there if we're producing it and we want people to view it in the masses. There's no better place to be viewed in the mass than YouTube and Vimeo. So for us, that's a lot more of that. If we need it to be locked down, if it's private, professors produce videos and reproduce stuff that for their classroom usage is okay, and for outside is not. And sometimes there is the use of a private Wowza server to be able to reproduce those copyrighted materials that need to be used digitally for classroom use.
Any other questions?
Sure.
So I actually have one thing for Eric. So you're telling me a funny story about using with your buildings. You had historical audio issues, right? Historical buildings and robocalls.
Okay, so you have to be careful with your infrastructure sometimes and know what's hooked into it and what's there. When we were live streaming, we were doing recordings, and hooking into the house audio, there was this repeated phone call that would be coming in because the phone system was actually hooked into the house audio, and the first time it happened was just a recording, but we also had a live stream where we had this repeated phone call, and nobody had any idea where it was hooked into, the phone, no idea how to get it out for months until finally they went through the entire structure of that auditorium and found where the phone line was plugged into the audio system, and finally got the phone ringing out of the house.
Doesn't everybody just love robocalls? All right. Thank you so much for joining us. We greatly appreciate it. And I want to greet my great panel here. I'm excited to have a chance to work with them all. And I thank you all.